Morning, everybody. 7 o'clock here in the UK. Very welcome to spend your breakfast with us here at Sky News. Fire and fury from nature as wildfires burn around the world. And today on the programme, the UN will reveal its long-awaited climate report into the extent of the crisis facing the planet. We're joined by the Business and Energy Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng shortly to ask, is the government really on track to be net zero by 2050? And how much will we all have to pay to go greener? Also, are holidaymakers being ripped off by firms overcharging for carrying out COVID-19 tests? The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, wants an investigation into exploitative practices. We'll talk to the travel expert, Simon Calder, about what's on the market. And, in addition...
Nature knows what it's doing, and we really don't. I mean, this is extraordinary and will calm you down immediately.
True, yeah. A wake-up call. Comedian Ruby Wax is on the programme to tell us what the pandemic has taught her about how to survive life. It's Monday, the 9th of August. The starkest warning yet as wildfires burn around the world. A major UN climate change report will spell out how big the crisis facing the planet truly is.
I'm on the island of Evia, where thousands have been forced to flee their homes as wildfires continue to burn here in Greece and other European nations.
Well, hello from Greenville here in Northern California, among the Plumas National Forest. And it is right now a town utterly destroyed.
And after a rather unsettled weekend, there's some glimmers of hope this week with drier and warmer conditions for some. I'll have the details for you later.
And I'm here in Minsk, 1 year since disputed elections set off a wave of protests brutally crushed by the regime. We're about to head in for a big conversation, it's called, with the man known as Europe's last dictator.
I'm at Marble Arch, where this multi-million-pound mound has had to scrap its entrance fees to try and encourage visitors.
And fighting for his life, now the Prime Minister's dad joined calls to save Geronimo, the alpaca, from being destroyed. It's going to be flipping busy, isn't it? I know. Now, the starkest warning yet on climate change is about to be revealed. In just 2 hours' time, the UN will lay out its report into the extent of the crisis facing the planet and how soon global temperatures could rise to a level countries pledged to try to avoid. We'll bring you the latest news conference live on the programme, and that's at 9 o'clock this morning UK time. It comes as wildfires continue to rage around the world, turning the skies orange across parts of Greece. In a moment, we'll talk to our correspondent live just north of Athens, and we'll speak to the Business and Energy Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng. First, this report from Katerina Vitozzi.
We've had months of extreme weather, but prepare for stark warnings that what seems incredible now may become normal in the future. The UN's IPCC report will assess our planet's current climate and use groundbreaking modelling to predict what's ahead. We expect projections of hotter days, making things like wildfires more frequent in places you might expect them, but also in those you wouldn't. This was West Yorkshire in 2019.
This bit of the moor was really badly damaged by a fire, and there's still some damage that lurks below. If we have these fire events, longer term, they dry the moors out, and the drier they are, the more likely they are to catch fire again. So we get into this sort of cyclical nature.
And if fires here become more frequent, it will lead to floods.
We had some heavy rain about an hour ago, and already all the streams have come up really quickly. It can't sort of hold back the same amount of water that it used to do.
The IPCC reports are the most significant reports in climate science. The previous one formed the backbone of the historic Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, which saw world governments come together and pledge to limit global warming to ideally 1.5 degrees Celsius. So what can this new report do, published just months ahead of the UN climate conference in Glasgow?
In June, we travelled to Bangladesh and saw the impact of rising sea levels and intensifying extreme weather like cyclones. Previous IPCC reports established the link between global warming and human activity. Expect more on that in the report. And that may sound bleak, but really it brings hope that the worst of a crisis created by humankind can be avoided if action is taken. Katerina Vitozzi, Sky News.
Pleased to say that Kwasi Kwarteng, the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, is with us here on the programme this morning. Good morning, Minister. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Are we on track to hit net zero emissions by 2050? I
think it's challenging, but I think we are on track. I think we're doing quite well. If you look since 1990, we've reduced our emissions by 45%, and we've managed to grow the economy by 80%. This is a world beating figure. People around the world, particularly in this year of COP26, look to us as leaders. And I'm very pleased today to be going up to the Humber region to announce more investment from Siemens Gamesa in building their wind turbines, and also GRI Renewables. It's a package of about 1,340 jobs. So it's really, really a good sign.
Well, so are you saying we will hit the 2050 target?
Well, it's 2021 now. I think there's every chance we will hit the target. Okay. It's a lot of work, but I think we can do that.
So it's challenging, though, isn't it?
It is challenging. I mean, it's not an easy thing. If it were an easy thing, we wouldn't be going on about it.
Leading the world, as you said. Alok Sharma, he's in charge of COP26. He says we are dangerously close to running out of time to avert catastrophic climate change. We'll hear more from the UN later on. Do you agree with him?
I think it's a critical situation. I think we've got to really focus on delivering on net zero. I'm very optimistic that we can do it, but I think Alok is right to highlight the risks of us not being able to achieve that target.
And is the best way to do that to jet around the world, more than 30 countries?
I'm very clear in terms of his role. COP26 is a big international event. It's probably the biggest international event of international diplomacy that we've hosted in decades. And he has to go and forge those alliances. He has to build networks. He has to deliver on people's commitments. And that does involve foreign travel.
Isn't that what Zoom's for?
Well, I think Zoom has its limitations. I think it's effective in some quarters. But if you're trying to conduct international diplomacy, if you're trying to build trust with other people, I think face-to-face meetings are critical for that.
And you're offsetting all of that carbon footprint that he's creating at the moment?
We're looking at ways of reducing carbon all the time across the government buildings, across public sector buildings as well. There are lots and lots of schemes
Things like
for us to do that.
Electric cars are a pillar of your green policy. But the thing with electric cars is there's no fuel duty with them, is there? So, and that brings in something like £20 billion a year at the moment for the government. So that's a £20 billion hole that you're going to have once we've got electric cars instead of fossil fuel cars. How are you going to... What?
Well, it's not something, Kay, that's going to happen overnight. I mean, it's not as if one day everyone is going to be having cars that have internal combustion engines, and then the next day people will move to electric vehicles. It's a gradual process. We've said...
you need to have quite quickly, don't you?
Yes, we do. I mean, but it's still gradual till 2030. It's still gradual till 2030. And I think we're encouraging people to take up EVs. If you look at EVs now...
EVs being?
Electric vehicles, sorry. If you take up an electric vehicle now, it's considerably cheaper than it was a few years ago. We're trying to roll out charging points, and we're trying to affect that transition.
So it's not something that you're worried about?
I think, actually, if I look at all the range of policies that we've introduced and the things we're looking to achieve, I think the electric vehicle rollout is something that is actually very encouraging.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the black hole that's being created because of fossil fuels and no longer getting the duty on that. Well, it's not something that the Treasury is going to worry about, because the Treasury, it would appear, is worried about all sorts of finances at the moment, which will...
Well, as you know, I'm the business secretary.
Indeed,
and
that's why I'm asking you.
You always ask me questions about tax and levels of how we're going to plug black holes, and that's obviously something for the Chancellor of the Exchequer, so maybe you could address that to the Treasury.
So it's nothing that you're worried about?
I'm concerned about it, but I don't have the authority to write budgets or dictate tax policy.
One wonders if he might after the next reshuffle.
I'm sure he will. He's doing a fantastic job. He's a very collegiate, excellent Chancellor, and I think everyone in Cabinet, including the Prime Minister, is 100% behind him.
So you would be surprised if he was demoted in a reshuffle?
Look, it's up to the Prime Minister, all those sort of personnel decisions.
But
I think that Rishi Sunak is doing a fantastic job as Chancellor. I think he's an excellent colleague, and I look forward to working with him very closely in the months and years ahead.
You've not really answered my question, though.
Well, I've just said it's not my job to say who's going to be in which job or who isn't.
No,
That's up
my
to the
question
Prime
was
Minister.
whether you would be surprised if he was demoted, given that he's doing such a great job.
I think he's doing a great job. Lots of things happen in politics. Things have been surprising. Some personnel moves can be surprising after reshuffles and all the rest of it. I think he's doing a great job, and I'm very focused on working with him to drive recovery after coronavirus.
I digress, because I wanted to ask you about electric vehicles and the fact that we've got this rollout where you can plug your car in, but it's incredibly difficult to find one of those. We're not moving quick enough on that, are we? What are you going to do?
I think we need to accelerate that. I think we're very focused on trying to get the charging points infrastructure up and running. We're working with DFT. We're working across government. DFT, Department for Transport.
Thank you.
We're working very closely with colleagues to try and do that. People have said that there are problems. And that's actually one of the...
schedule on that?
I don't think so. I think we need... if you look at the way in which electric vehicles have been taken up, we started from pretty much a standing start 5 years ago. There are thousands of these vehicles now on the road, and I think it's going to ramp up exponentially, but we need to make sure that we get the infrastructure right, the charging points.
So it's not good enough at the moment, but you've got it in hand. And
I think it's something that we could... if you look at where we've come from on this, even just 4 or 5 years ago, there were hardly any electric vehicles. Over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a huge increase in people buying them and people using them. There's much more awareness of that. I don't drive an electric car, no. But I don't drive a diesel car either. I haven't driven a car in London for years.
OK. Why would you... Would you drive an electric car?
Yeah, I would. The next car I buy will be almost certainly an electric vehicle.
And why are we investing in electric vehicles particularly rather than synthetic fuel, which apparently a lot of governments feel that is the way forward rather than electric?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are lots of alternatives in terms of decarbonised power, in terms of decarbonised vehicles. Electric vehicles have been invested in. Lots of people are manufacturing them. I speak to car manufacturers all the time, and they're very much focused on electric vehicles. And that's what people seem to be, the market, people choosing their own vehicles seem to be directed and more focused on electric vehicles. That doesn't mean that in the future we can't have, as you say, synthetic fuels.
Can we talk about boilers as well? Where are we as far as boilers are concerned? 40%, I was surprised by this number, I'm sure my viewers will be as well. 40% of UK emissions come from our homes.
That's right.
And a lot of that is to do with boilers and heating our property in other ways as well. What are we going to do about that? Because I was expecting a report, wasn't I, at the end of July, which hasn't yet arrived, the low carbon heating strategy.
Yeah, you're right. So that I was working on this, for more than 2 years when I was Energy Minister as well. We are going to come up with a heat and building strategy which identifies the problem and actually has solutions to the problem you've just mentioned, which is that a lot of our emissions are coming from houses which aren't energy efficient and also heat sources which have too much carbon in them, basically. And the heat and building strategy, which is going to come out very soon,
But it's delayed, isn't it? Why is it
It's been slightly delayed.
Why? Because
we want to coordinate it with also the approach to COP26 and also the net zero strategy, which my department wants to come out in September. So we want to make a big push on that in September.
What do people do about their gas boilers? What are you going to say about that?
I think in terms of gas boilers, there's no cause for alarm at all. I think people are going to have gas boilers, but over time, just as with the ICEs, the internal combustion engine vehicles, we want to see a transition. But that transition is dependent on lots of other things happening. We need to look at hydrogen, we need to look at heat pumps and make sure that they're affordable. So there's lots of things that have to happen.
Who's going to pay for them?
I think a mixture of people. Usually it's government will pay to some extent, the private sector particularly, and if you look at offshore wind, which relates to the announcement I was making today, that was a private sector that 80% of the investment there came from the private sector. So that they will play a part as well.
So you'll help people buy heat pumps?
We've always had a policy of helping vulnerable people buy and shift the transition from make the transition from decarbonised or carbon emitting sources of heat to decarbonised heat.
And we're going to have to look at that more and more, aren't we? Because people are more and more working from home.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a good idea that people work from home, or does it hold them back?
I think flexibility is good. I think that if you're trying to make a career, it probably makes sense to actually meet colleagues and actually build a network learn from other people, and I think that's probably best done in the workplace. But as far as I'm concerned, this is not something which the government is going to dictate to businesses. I think employers and employees will come to their own arrangements depending on what business and what their company does.
What do you say to your staff?
I think that we should try and come in maybe 2 to 3 days a week at least, but it's a gradual process, isn't it? No one's being forced back against their will. We've got to make the environment very safe. But I think it is probably quite a good thing to spend more time in the week at work. And that's just a personal view.
Problem is, people who are coming to work are being penalised financially, aren't they? Because they're having to pay to come to work. People who are working from home are getting the same money and they're not having to pay to commute. Is that fair?
So where I think, as I've said, I think it's up to the employers and the employees. And the one thing I've noticed is that different businesses have a different tolerance, if you like, of people being able to work from home. So if you run an engineering business or an architecture business, you've got models, you're making models that you have to combine with other colleagues. It's very hard to do that from home, but there are other types of work which are easier to do from home. So I don't think that we can make a hard and fast rule on all of this.
That wasn't my question, though. My question is, are people being penalised financially coming to work?
I don't think people are, if you think about it, because in most instances, people will come 2 or 3 days a week. So there's very few instances, I think, of people exclusively working from home or exclusively working from the office.
That's potentially costing people £75, £100 a week to do that. And if they're staying and working from home, they're not having to pay that.
But as I said in my earlier bit of the answer, is that I think that's up to the employers and the employees to work out what the best arrangement is.
But you accept that there's a discrepancy there that needs to be looked at?
I don't accept anything. All I'm saying is that it's for the employers and the employees. And and also that it can change. I mean, the same employee might work 2 days a week, 1 week, and then 3 or 4 days a week the next week.
Not quite sure what you're saying. I mean, it's costing people to go to work, isn't it? It just is.
I'm saying
and
that across...
people who are staying at home are not having to pay.
So I'm saying across a company, I don't think it's the case generally that there'll be people who are exclusively working from home and others in the same business who will be exclusively working in the office. That's what I'm saying.
And to that end, you think that people should come back to work for all sorts of reasons?
I think there are good reasons. Yeah, I think there are good reasons to come back to work. But as I always stress, I think it's up to individual companies, individual employees and employers to come to their own arrangements. OK,
let me ask about Geronimo. He's an August story, isn't he? And the Prime Minister's dad has been writing in the paper today about it. He says, tear up that threatening letter, Minister. It's not a ringing endorsement, is it?
I'm not sure where Stanley's coming from on this. My understanding is that the alpaca was tested positive for TB, and the rules are that you have to be culled, because bovine TB is really damaging to farmers and people who make their livelihoods in agriculture, and that's why we have the policy.
Yeah, I suppose my point is that this is an absolute PR disaster for the government. You could have got ahead of it last week and you didn't.
I don't think it's a PR disaster. I think, as you say, it's an August story. It's obviously difficult because there's a lot of people invested emotionally in a story of an animal, but there's a policy and there's no reason why the policy shouldn't be stuck to.
Just on a more serious note, while I've got you, and I know we're slightly running over time, but I did want to ask you about the Gurkhas. They have gone on hunger strike, 3 gentlemen who have served this country for a very long time, and their pension is £20 a month. They feel that they're not being treated fairly, and they are prepared to have a hunger strike to the death. What would you say?
I think that Gurkhas are fantastic soldiers. They've had a unique contribution to British history and our military. And I think that it's very sad if they feel that they've been treated in this way. I mean, clearly, I've just heard of the story now. And I'd like to look...
On Friday, we had one of them on the programme. I mean, the point is, do you think it should be looked at, surely?
Everything, yeah, of course it should be.
70-year-olds starving themselves to death.
Of course it should be. I mean, for them to have come to a point where this is the decision that they've taken and they want to pursue this path, of course that should be looked at. But I'm not going to comment on details that I'm not fully apprised of.
OK, it's good to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time. We appreciate it. I know you've got a busy round of speaking to the media this morning. I'm always pleased when you do us first. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Just a reminder, if you want to catch up on any of that interview or watch the programme when you're out and about this morning, then, of course, you can do that. You can do that via our website. You can do that via our YouTube channel. You can do that via Twitter if you would like to. Oh, look, it's leaving us hanging there. But that happens sometimes, doesn't it? Depends on your Wi-Fi signal. Now, wildfires are out of control across Europe. We're hearing with thousands of people evacuated from their homes, leaving the fires to destroy everything in their path. In Greece, the country's second biggest island of Evia has been burning for almost a week. The Prime Minister says the situation is nightmarish and British firefighters have flown out to join an international effort to control the flames. Well, our Europe correspondent Michelle Clifford is in the town of Limni on Evia now for us. Hello to you. Oh, my goodness me, those poor people who would have had that house behind you. Good morning.
Morning, Kay. Yes, I mean, devastating scenes for them to return to. Limni was one of the first villages on the island to be evacuated, and you can see what damage the fires brought to this island. In fact, the man whose family owns this house behind me has just gone inside to have a look. He's clearly very upset. I was talking to him and he said, what can we do? They did manage to get off the island. Some of the residents have returned today to see the state of their properties. They feel lucky that a limited number of properties have been burned here, but a lot of people are left without power now, left without water. Now, because they're on the edge of the sea, they were able to escape quickly in boats and ferries. But have a look out there, Kay. You can't see very far because ash cloud and smoke covers the entire area, and that's...
Oh, I think we may have just lost Michelle just for now. There she is. I think she's coming back to us now. Hello to you, Michelle. Are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. I was just saying, right across the island, there is this canopy of smoke enveloping the entire area, and it has really been a battle because there's been no rain for the last week, very high temperatures. It means the ground here is parched, and the Greek fire service is really struggling to control the blazes. Now, they have got help. Yesterday, we met Ukrainian and Romanian firefighters who've flown in to offer assistance. There are also British crews on the ground now to help the Greek authorities, but they really are fighting, I suppose, something of a losing battle because rain isn't anticipated, more high temperatures this week, so really difficult situation. And you see this sort of scene, unfortunately, repeated in village after village right across this island.
OK, for now, thank you. Fires also blazing out of control in several other European countries as well. 2 people have died on Friday in a forest fire in the Calabria region of southern Italy. It's believed they were attempting to save their olive trees. The island of Sardinia also saw wildfires engulf the outskirts of its largest city, Sassari, over the weekend. And an increasingly desperate situation on Turkey was alleviated by the arrival of rain this weekend, quelling fires that had been carried by wind across the southern coast. 8 people confirmed to have died in the country over the last fortnight. And this is the scene in Spain, in the Valencia province on the country's Mediterranean coast. Firefighters worked day and night through the weekend to tackle fires which ripped through the dry forest areas outside the city. A heads up for you, 9 o'clock this morning, we'll have live coverage of the IPCC report into climate change. So that is basically the UN telling us what they think is going to happen as far as climate change is concerned. First time we've had one of those reports since 2013. That will be covered also extensively on the Daily Climate Show, 6:30 and 9:30 this evening. Still to come on the programme for you. At 7:30, I'm going to be speaking to the former Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir David King, about what we can expect from the UN's climate report. Then at 8:20, we'll be live at Manchester Velodrome, preparing to welcome home some of our Olympic heroes as they arrive back later on today. They're on a BA flight right now. I believe that they will be landing within the next couple of hours, and they've got 1 or 2 treats in store for them. We'll tell you all about that. And then at 8:45, we'll find out why a father with terminal cancer has challenged himself to climb England's highest peak. The Taliban's claimed 3 more provincial capitals in Afghanistan as their advances through the country continue apace. The city of Kunduz, the 6th largest in the country, is the most significant gain the Taliban have made so far in northern Afghanistan. A Taliban spokesperson told Al Jazeera TV that there is no agreement on a ceasefire with the Afghan government and warned against further US intervention in the country. At least 15 people have been killed after a coach veered off a road in western Turkey. Another 17 people were injured in the crash and taken to 5 different hospitals for treatment. The coach was travelling to Izmir when it left the road. The Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko will face the press today. The man, widely regarded by many as a brutal dictator, is likely to face questions about opposition protests, the forced landing of a Ryanair jet and the threat to a Belarusian athlete at the Olympics who has now sought solace in Poland, I think. Joining us now is our correspondent Diana Magne, who is in Belarus for us this morning. Hello to you, Diana. Very good morning. So what happens? What's the plan?
Hi, Kay. Well, it's 1 year to the day since Alexander Lukashenko claimed a landslide victory in elections which were widely conceived as rigged, which started off a wave of protest which has been brutally crushed by the regime. I mean, we were driving around Minsk yesterday. There is not a hint of protest anymore. Tens of thousands of people have been detained. There have been numerous reports of torture in the country's detention centres. Hundreds of thousands of people have fled the country. As you just said, we saw Alexander Lukashenko bring down a Ryanair jet to try and bring in a dissident journalist. He is now flooding Lithuania and Poland with Iraqi migrants as retaliation for EU sanctions. And any hint of protest has effectively been crushed. It is a purge in this country. Last month, raids on the few remaining civil society activists and NGOs that are left. And of all the people that I spoke to this time last year, around about the elections and in the weeks of protest since, most of them have either fled the country or are too scared to speak. So on the anniversary of that election, he has invited the Western press for the first time to what he's calling a big conversation. It seems to be a lot of Belarusian state journalists, Russian journalists, and a few of us Western media who are waiting to go in. He tends to talk for a very, very long time at these events. In 2019, he spoke for 7.5 hours. So we'll see whether he actually answers any questions or is held accountable in any way for this incredibly cruel crackdown that we have seen over the past year. Why is he doing this? Well, perhaps to signal that he has the country back under control and to invite us in to show that he has.
OK, for now, Diana, thank you. Of course, Diana updating us throughout the course of the day here on Sky News about that news conference. She said he does talk for a very long time. Quick look at this morning's papers. Still lauding the excellence of the British Olympic team. Let's start with, there it is, with the Metro, first of all. The greatest cyclist, Jason Kenny, wins his 7th gold medal on the final day of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. I think I'm right in saying that he is flying home today with his missus. They're on a BA flight, should land about 10 o'clock. Apparently on board 8 golds, 9 silvers and 2 bronze. Which weighs in total 10 kilos of medals. Can you believe it? I'm also hearing that apparently if you've won a gold, you get a gold card. If you've won a silver, you get a silver card. And if you've won a bronze, you need to try harder next time so you can get a gold card. Gleam GB is what the Sun is saying this morning. Here, a 65 medal miracle, as does the Express. Honour heroes who lifted nation, it says, picturing Welsh Olympic champion Lauren Price, who won gold in the ring. I think she's also on board the aeroplane. And The Guardian hails the miracle of Tokyo on its front page, featuring Team GB's Olympic power couple, Laura and Jason Kenny. There they are celebrating. I think they've got, am I right in saying something like 16 medals between them? Most impressive. Absolutely ridiculous, as Rich, my director, says. It's amazing. Liquid gold. Here's one way the Team GB heroes are being quite rightly looked after as they travel back to the UK. Look at that. How cool is that? My goodness me. I'm sure they've not been drinking very much for the last few weeks, if not months, and as a result, they'll be celebrating on board. Who knows what they might be like when they get off the plane at Heathrow. That should make for some interesting interviews. And in the next hour, we'll be at Manchester Velodrome as well, ready to welcome back some of the Olympic heroes when they arrive back in the UK later on today. Now, it's been called London's worst tourist attraction. Now the £2 million Marble Arch Mound has stopped charging people to visit in an attempt to draw more interest, is what we're being told. Joined by Jemima, who has been sent to the Mound for us this morning. Hello to you, Jemima. I mean, it was an absolute mess last week. What's it looking like now?
Yes, it was a little bit of a mess, wasn't it, Kate? It's looking, I would say, marginally better now. There's a bit more flowers and plants on the side, so certainly a little bit more decorative, but we will have to wait and see whether the promise of a free ticket will attract people. Cost £2 million, as you were saying, open on the 26th of July. It was very swiftly closed because there was an absolute wave of criticism online. People called it London's worst tourist attraction, Teletubby Hill, a rubbish heap, so not rave reviews. The intention was to attract tourists into a part of London which has been really badly hit by the pandemic, add some landscaping to an area which has got a lot of congestion. The reality is there is still a lot of congestion. If you can see, I'm kind of right in the middle of a very busy roundabout, but we will have to wait and see whether that promise of a free ticket in August will bring the visitors in.
So is it actually open, Jemima? Can people climb it at the moment or not?
So it opens at 11 a.m. So from 11 a.m. it is open. People start going up from then. So yeah, it's open today. You can go online and look at the availability. So it is open for visitors. We'll start seeing at about 11 whether people turn up. I imagine the weekends will be the slightly busier time if the visitors do come.
It looks ridiculous. OK, Jemima, for now, thank you very much. It does, though, doesn't it? I mean, it costs them £2 million for that. Don't know. Go up the Shard if you want to get high up. Quick look at the weather for you now. Here's Naz. Hello to you, Naz. I don't know what you think of it. Good morning.
I think it'll be useful for me to head to the top of it and have a look at what the weather's like, get a closer look, right? Not for £2 million, so today's weather. Unsettled again, following on from the weekend, but I've got a little bit of good news for this week.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. I'm going to start off with some good news to start the week. It's looking somewhat drier and slightly warmer for some southern areas of the UK this week. But further north and west, it's still going to remain quite unsettled. And today follows suit from the weekend. We continue with showery conditions, a pretty wet start, in fact, across many central and southern parts of England and Wales. First thing, some hefty downpours. And elsewhere, we are seeing some showers further north and west, mostly showery bands of rain. Now, going into this afternoon, and we'll see the rain across parts of the south and southeast clear off into the North Sea. But then behind that, there will be lots of showers around. In fact, it's a sunshine and showers kind of day for most places. Those showery bands of rain will become more widespread, breaking up into showers. That will be heavy at times with the risk of thunderstorms and hail, particularly heavy downpours, I think, for today across parts of Northern Ireland, particularly to the east of Northern Ireland, as well as for southern parts of Scotland and southern areas of England. Fewer showers expected towards this evening.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, the Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng said it will be challenging for the UK to meet its climate change targets, but he believes that it is possible. He was speaking as the UN prepares to deliver its Starkest Warning Yet on climate change and the extent of the crisis facing the planet. Speaking to me earlier, Mr Kwarteng said the UK is on course to meet those targets.
I think it's challenging, but I think we are on track. I think we're doing quite well. If you look since 1990, we've reduced our emissions by 45%, and we've managed to grow the economy by 80%. This is a world-beating figure. People around the world, particularly in this year of COP26, look to us as leaders, and I'm very pleased today to be going up to the Humber region to announce more investment from Siemens Gamesa in building their wind turbines, and also GRI Renewables. It's a package of about 1,340 jobs, so it's really, really a good sign.
Well, so are you saying we will hit the 2050 target?
Well, it's 2021 now. I think there's every chance we will hit the target.
Okay.
It's a lot of work, but I think we can do that.
At least 4 people have been reported missing as officials in the US say the Dixie wildfire in Northern California is now the largest in the state's history. There's concern that winds are picking up again, which could help drive the fire on. Mark Stone is in Greenville in Northern California, a town which was in direct line of the fire.
Well, hello from Greenville here in Northern California among the Plumas National Forest. And it is right now a town utterly destroyed. You can see behind me here, there is hardly a corner of this place of 1,000 or so people that has been untouched by this latest wildfire to rip through this part of North America. You can see here, this was the library, the Greenville Library, the sign itself damaged. And as we move around, you can make out the wall along which the bookcases were once and now simply a pile of ash. This is one of so many communities right across this town, so many businesses that have been destroyed. We drove up here from some of the larger communities through the course of the morning, and we had heard the stories, we'd seen some of the images of the destruction, but you know, it's only really when you get here that you can feel it, and it's quite breathtaking how much destruction there is across the community. The positives, and you know, everyone is looking for those always, the positives are 1 or 2 houses, the owners of those houses so relieved that they are untouched. Those houses bizarrely, randomly have not been destroyed. The other clear positive is that most, if not all, the people here managed to be evacuated before the fire hit. But there are a few people, as of Sunday night, still unaccounted for, and they will continue to search for them. Now, this is another building here. You can make out it was once a restaurant here. The kitchen on the other side, as we move over, you can see the tables and chairs still laid out. Now, behind all this, of course, is the conversation about climate change. From a Californian perspective, there are 2 issues. The local one is forest management. The forests, locals say, very badly managed for decades, a tinderbox being allowed to grow up over decades. And then there is the wider issue of climate change, just how much the climate is changing here and the effect that that is having on communities right across the region.
Well, to that end, UN climate scientists are preparing to lay out a stark picture of the current state of the climate crisis in a landmark report to be published at 9 o'clock this morning. It's the first time since 2013 that they've done it. Of course, we'll cover that for you extensively here on Sky News from 9 o'clock this morning. Joining us right now is the former Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir David King, who has previously served as the Foreign Secretary's Special Representative for Climate Change. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning, Sir David. It's always a pleasure to see you. What do you think we might hear later on today?
Well, good morning, Kay. I think for the first time we are going to get a very bleak report from the IPCC. This, by the way, is the first of 3 parts of their report. It always comes first part, physical science basis, second part, impacts, adaptation and vulnerability, and then the third part is the mitigation of climate change. We have to wait for the third part to see what their recommendations are for action, which is unfortunate. Those will only come out next year after COP. But what we are going to hear is, just as you've given in your report from Northern California, changes in the Earth's climate system are happening throughout the world, in every region of the world. And this report is going to deal with this on a regional analysis basis. If we look at emissions reduction, and at the moment that is all that is really on the table for COP26, emissions reduction will take at least to 2050 to get us to net zero. And then there's another 20 to 30 years before the world's climate system will stabilize. And even when we get to that point, sea levels will continue to rise, not only for the next 100 years, but for the next 1,000 years. So what we can see into the future, let me just give you one bleak aspect of this, which is go to Southeast Asia. The whole country of Vietnam is virtually close to sea level and will be subject to sea level rise meaning that the whole of the country, or 90% of the country's land, will be under seawater at least once a year by mid-century, in 30 years' time. Now, if we take that, and that country is a very big rice producer, as just one example of what's ahead of us, and you look at that film that you're showing right now, the kind of devastation that happens with fire also happens with water. And so what we can see is really remarkably dangerous changes happening in the global climate system, and I believe this report is going to clarify that. In fact, temperature rises today are equivalent to where we were 2 to 3 million years ago. We have to go back that far in time to match up to where we are today. And I'm one of those who believes that what we need is to treat this really as a climate emergency. I would like to see a Security Council for Climate Crisis to be set up to advise governments around the world, not on a 4-yearly basis, but on a monthly basis, what needs to be done. We're looking at pictures now of the impact of sea level rise. I think the way forward has to be, yes, deep and rapid emissions reduction, but we also need to bring down the amount of greenhouse gases already in the atmosphere, because at this level, Arctic sea ice has been effectively lost during the polar summer.
Talk to me about the Paris Accord, if you would. Is any of it actually working?
I think I would have to say it doesn't look as if it is. And the reason is simply because greenhouse gas emissions are continuing to rise and the rate of increase is continuing to rise. What has worked, and this was delivered very much by Europe, is decreased costs, for example, of renewable energy systems, solar power, wind turbines, etc. Massive decreased costs, which means that really for most of the world, certainly between all countries between the tropics, but for most of the world, it is now cheaper to build new electricity production from renewable energy systems. Now, that is a very big advance, but it takes a long time for that to roll out. The second big challenge is the rapidly emerging economies of the world. This big new middle class just over 1 billion in the year 2000, is now more like 3 billion. This big new middle class demanding the same standard of living that we have, and I'm afraid the same level of consumption and of emissions, and this is continuing to rise. So if you look at India and China, the rate of growth of the economy at 6 to 8% a year means that their electricity demand is rising, and then as the middle classes demand more and more energy, so that rises not just in proportion to the population increase, but it rises in proportion to the middle class increase. We welcome this new middle class, but we haven't really taken into account what the contribution is to climate change globally.
Fascinating stuff. Let me just ask you quickly before I let you go. How worried are you about what the Earth will look like in 2050?
Well, I'm very worried in the sense that we can't possibly reduce emissions to solve the problem. I believe this report is going to explain to us that, as I've said, sea levels will continue to rise for the next hundreds of years, even 1,000 years, because it's all in the pipeline. What has happened in the Arctic Sea, the exposure of the sea to polar summer, has meant the loss of ice from Greenland at unprecedented rates. What we need well before 2050, reduce emissions as rapidly as possible, but also remove greenhouse gases and repair the climate systems that have passed their tipping points. I'm expecting that for the first time, this report will refer to tipping points, but it doesn't really recognize yet that the tipping point has already been passed in the Arctic Circle region. We have to do what we can to try to refreeze the Arctic Sea during the polar summer. That in itself would give us, would buy time to allow us to do considerably more. in terms of managing our future. But it looks very bleak to me at the moment. We need to see an appetite for world action going beyond just net zero by 2050. That is really my key message.
OK. It's good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us this morning. Appreciate it. 9 o'clock is when we're going to hear more on climate change, the biggest climate change report since 2013. Have a look at our graphic that we've been showing you all through the week last week. If you weren't with us, let me just explain it to you. It looks a bit complicated to start with. It's very straightforward as soon as I explained it to you. The top line, that is the real-time power mix. In other words, which percentage we are using of renewables, which is nuclear, which is fossil fuels. You'll see nuclear has gone up quite a lot, actually, since last week. I think it was in the teens last week. That's what it is today. Global warming, that is the figure. You can see how much warmer the Earth is now than in 1880, when modern record keeping began. So you can see it's 1.23 degrees warmer now than it was when records began. Scientists believe it will take, the next figure, how long it will take to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius, just 11 years. And that is the figure seen by many as a point of no return for the planet, just 11 years away. And then finally, a huge and frightening statistic, the total amount of CO2 emissions in millions of tonnes being emitted in real time. More on that from 9 o'clock this morning. Now, are holidaymakers being ripped off by firms overcharging for carrying out COVID-19 tests? The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has asked the competition watchdog to investigate what he's called excessive pricing and exploitative practices among PCR COVID testing firms. He tweeted this: people should be able to go on holiday, whether it's to see family or just to relax, without fearing excessive fees for PCR tests. That's why I've asked the Independent Competition and Markets Authority to see how we can crack down on unfair market practices. Well, we can speak now to Simon Calder, the travel editor of the Independent newspaper. Hello to you, Simon. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. What do you think? Are we being ripped off?
Oh, certainly, yes. There's absolutely no question of it. I mean, let me give you an example. This is what you are going to have to pay £58 for, which is towards the bottom end of the expectations. Typically, it's around £70, and effectively, it's just a few bits of kit. You take your own swab, you then post that away, and then hopefully you get your result within a couple of days. And this is a legal requirement for anybody coming back into the UK. You can take the test at the airport when you arrive, but you've got to have a PCR test within 2 days of your arrival. And if you're coming back from an amber country and you haven't been vaccinated, that's going to be another test as well. Add that to the pre-departure test, which can be a lateral flow test coming into the UK. Basically, you're looking at about £100 per person, which clearly is adding a huge amount. I mean, I've been away a couple of times to Europe since we were allowed to in May, and on both occasions, my testing has cost more than my airfares. So there's huge amounts of profits being made. It's interesting that they've chosen this time, second week in August, to get onto the Competition and Markets Authority. And actually, the problem doesn't seem to be lack of competition. They've got 420 suppliers, but clearly lots of money being made because nobody actually wants one of these tests. We simply want to get on with our lives after having come back to beautiful Britain from our holidays. And unfortunately, we have to take them. So I calculate £300 million has been spent by British travellers since April coming back into the UK, and August is going to be peak testing. The government has stipulated this, and I tell you what, Kay, the travel industry is furious, partly because they think it's way too late to be weighing into this, and actually it's the Health Secretary who's kind of responsible for us needing to do this. And secondly, it signifies that because they've asked for an inquiry, this isn't going to go away anytime soon. And so therefore people will be obliged to test well into the autumn, winter, perhaps next year, perhaps every year. It's going to be part of our regime, and clearly huge cost implications. And if you happen to test positive on day 2, well, it's not only you, it's everybody on your plane if you're flying on one of the low-cost airlines who's going to be, at least for the next week, asked to self-isolate.
What's also frustrating, I suppose, for some is that the government is actually giving lateral flow tests for free. You can just contact a website and they issue you with half a dozen or whatever, 7 I think there is in a pack. But you have to pay for a PCR test, which basically is doing more or less the same thing. Is there not an argument within the industry for saying you should be paying for this as well?
Well, yes. I mean, the government has always taken the view, if I'm going on holiday, I pay for any testing. And I think a lot of people would say, yeah, it's not right to have the NHS effectively subsidising my holidays. Lateral flow tests, which of course are absolutely ubiquitous. I've taken dozens of them. I'm sure you and your colleagues have as well. But the thing is, the government says we've got to have a PCR test when you come back, because if it's positive, we're going to sequence it and we're going to find out what variants are coming into the UK. Which is not a bad idea, except that the viral load from people who are testing positive is often so low that they can't actually test it. And it's said that fewer than 5% of these things are actually positive results are actually sequenced. So there's an awful lot of people paying an awful lot of money without very, very much reward.
OK. Why are you there, Sam? Are you going away?
No, look, this is a place of celebration, Kay. As from 4 a.m. yesterday, people can arrive from France. This is the Eurostar terminal. Crikey, I would love to be stepping on board a train to Paris and connecting to the south of France, but I'm not. However, Eurostar saying they're selling 4 times as many tickets this week as they were last week. OK, fascinating, Simon. Thanks very much indeed. Appreciate it. Thank you. Knowing how much time a woman has if she wants to have a baby has until now been difficult to predict. But new research into the menopause from scientists at the University of Exeter, Cambridge and Copenhagen might change all of that. Their findings could lead doctors to be able to tell women how long they have left if they want to start a family. Let's talk about it, should we? Joining us now is Anna Murray, and she is a professor, of course, from the University of Exeter. Hello to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. What's your research found about the menopause?
Well, we've been investigating reproductive aging, and one of the key time points in reproductive aging in women is the timing of menopause. And we've known for many years, really, that there's a genetic component to the variation in menopause timing. And our study has looked at the genetics of more than 200,000 women from many studies across the world. And we found that there are about 300 genetic variations that influence the timing of menopause in the sort of average range. And those each individual variant just affects menopause by from as little as a few weeks up to actually a few years. So this is really a big advance in our knowledge of the genetic component of this trait that obviously affects half of the population. And what we can do with this is start to understand particularly some of the biological processes that are really key. And what we saw was that a process that repairs damaged DNA seems to be one of the really key things that's involved in determining the timing of a woman's menopause. And the reason that it's important, one of the reasons it's important to understand this timing is because of the link between menopause timing and fertility. We know that women become naturally infertile several years before menopause. So an understanding of this reproductive aging process, we hope, will help women with their fertility.
OK, I wonder why it is that life expectancy has risen over the last 150 years, but the age that most women hit the menopause has remained about 50.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. I think so the genetics can actually kind of help us understand that. And I think as I said, a lot of the genetic studies of aging are showing us that the processes involved in determining age are much more about diseases of old age, whereas the genetics of reproductive aging is quite different. And many of the genes seem to be acting very, very early in a woman's life. In fact, right back to the time when they were a fetus. And that's because menopause is largely determined by your ovarian reserve. So the number of eggs you have in your ovary, and that gets laid down when you're actually a fetus, before you're born. And then you lose eggs throughout your lifespan. And it's when you get down to a very low number of eggs, perhaps around 1,000, that you go through menopause. So that's why I think the two processes are probably quite distinct.
That's fascinating stuff. Professor, really interesting. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We appreciate it. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.